so now we've got our clones drawing on and sticking to our text. We're going to add a bit of extra detail to make this visually a little more interesting. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change the size of these spheres and add a bit of variety, so we can just use a randomizer or a random effector on our cloner. So I'm going to select my cloner, make sure it's selected, because if we select a cloner and then make an effector, it's automatically applied. So I've selected my cloner, I'm going to go to my MoGraph menu, and under effectors I'm going to pick the random effector. Now, because these clones are trying to stick to the text, we won't see the result of the effector straight away. We actually have to play this through to see the result. Before we do that, I'm going to go into the parameters tab of my random effector, and I'm going to set it up. So I don't want to change the position of these clones. That's the default, is to randomize the position, so I'm going to turn that off. I do want to randomize the scale, and I want to randomize it uniformly so that we don't get oval shapes or stretched spheres. So I'm going to turn on uniform scale. A scale of 0 means 0 change, so they don't change at all. A scale change of 1 means double the scale change. It's a little confusing to set up, but I'm going to set mine at 1. I'm going to hit rewind on my timeline and hit play, and what I should see now is that I've got quite a variety of sizes in my text. In my spheres. Now again, my text is a little hard to make out. I might need to go back to my cloner and change that step value to an even larger number so that I've got less spheres. The other thing I could try is actually shrinking the size of my master sphere. If I make that a little bit smaller, I might be able to fill up this text and make it a bit more legible. I'm going to go back to the sphere. I'm going to go to its object tab and change the radius to about, I'll try 7. And again, you may have a different setting on yours. I might go even smaller than that. What if I go to 5? Okay, so now I've got smaller spheres. It's making it a little bit easier to see this text being drawn as text. So this is all a balance, just to make the text as legible as possible. It's a balance between the size of the cloned object and how many of them we have by changing the step value. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I've got a step size of 12 and my sphere is a radius of 5. I'm pretty happy with that. I know I'm going to put more shapes in it, so I'm going to have, I guess, less than I need at the moment. Okay, so that's good. I'm happy with that. The next thing I want to do now is I want to add some new shapes into my MoGraph text objects. At the moment, we're just cloning a bunch of spheres. I'm going to create a cube and add that into my cloner, so I'll have a mixture of spheres and cubes. So I'm going to go to Create menu. I'm going to go Create Object Cube, and I want to make a cube about the same size as my original sphere. So my original sphere had a radius of 5, so if I make my cube maybe 5 units in each side, it's quite small, maybe a little bit bigger. I'll try 8. The other thing that I want to do, I'm going to add a bit of interest to this. I'm going to have a couple of shapes that make up the text. I'm also going to have a couple of shapes that fly off, kind of like debris or sparks or energetic shapes that fly off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the shapes that make up my text, I'm going to keep them rounded and softer looking, and the ones that fly off, I'm going to make them look like little shards or pieces, so they're going to be hard edged. So the cube that I've got, if I just zoom in really close, it's got hard edges. But if I select my cube and turn on this fillet function under the Object tab, a fillet is a curved edge. I need to set the fillet radius fairly low. In my case, I want it around maybe 1.5 centimeters. And what the fillet does is it shaves off the edges of the curve of the cube so that it makes it a little rounded. So that way it's going to match a little bit more with my spherical shape that's in my cloner. So once I've set my cube up and I've got its edge filleted so it's nice and smooth, I'm going to drag and drop it into the cloner, And what we should see as soon as we do that is our cloner now updates with a collection of cubes and spheres. Because you can put as many objects into a cloner as you want, and the cloner will just duplicate any of the objects that are in it. Okay, if I hit rewind and hit play, okay, so that's working, but what I can see is that my cubes aren't rigid. I haven't got a rigid body for them, so they're not colliding and separating themselves from the other clones. So there's a really easy way to make our cubes rigid bodies, and we want those same follow settings as well, which is in the rigid body tag on the sphere. So basically we just want to copy this tag and put it on the cubes as well, so our cubes become rigid. The easiest way to do that is to hold down the command key and click and drag this rigid body tag from the sphere into the cubes section as well. So in Cinema4D, when you move pretty much anything, if you hold down the command key, you duplicate that thing that you're moving. So in this case, I've just selected my rigid body tag from the sphere, held down command, click and drag it onto the cube, and I've now duplicated that rigid body tag, and I can see now my cubes and my spheres are colliding and interacting nicely. So that's looking pretty good. Now, because I've made my text very thin and I changed the step size of my cloner, I think I actually want a few more clones in here. I want more than that. Yours may be different. I'm going to go to my cloner and I'm going to reduce the step size, which will give me more clones. Maybe I'll go a little bit lower again. I'm down to about 8 centimeters now. And that's really starting to fill up with shapes now. I'm happy with that. I can still read the text. That's the important thing. And I've got a good number of cloned objects in my text. Okay, so that's all working. So there's my two shapes in the cloner. Now I said before I wanted to have some kind of debris flying off as this thing formed as well to give it a bit more energy. So I'm going to create a little shard shape, something little and hard-edged. Under my Create menu, if I go to Objects, I'm going to pick a pyramid. So a pyramid is exactly what it says, it's a pyramid. I'm going to reduce the size of this so it's actually a little bit smaller than the shapes that I put into my text. So I might put it down to maybe 3 centimeters on each side. Actually, that could be a little bit small. I might make it a wee bit bigger than that. Now, I'm going to put this pyramid into my cloner as well, so it gets cloned. So I'm going to drag and drop it into the cloner. Now, at the moment, it's just stuck to the text. It's not colliding with the other clones because it's not a rigid body. And remember the first time we set up the rigid body tag with our spheres, they all went flying off in all directions. I actually want that for my pyramids. So rather than copying the rigid body tag that I've got on the other two that's making them stick nicely, I'm going to make a new rigid body tag for my pyramid. And because it's not going to follow my text, it should go flying off, which is actually what I want. So I'm going to select my pyramid, I'm going to go to Tags, Simulation Tags, Rigid Body, and that's now creating what I wanted. So I don't have a follow value set for it, so it's not sticking to the text, and its collisions with the other clones are giving it a really nice sort of shattering dynamic kind of look. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now again, I want a little bit more variety. I've only got these pyramids in there. I want a little bit of variety in my shattering pieces as well. So I'm going to create another shape to go in there. I'm going to go Create, Object. I'm going to use a thing called a platonic, which is just a sort of a spherical-ish shape, and you can change how many sides it has. I'm actually just going to use the default setting, which gives us this sort of very angular geometric sphere shape. Again, I want angular shapes for my shards that fly off. I'm going to make this really small. I'll put it down to about maybe 6 centimeters. I'm going to drop this into my cloner. And again, I'm just going to make a basic rigid body tag for it so that it flies off like my pyramids. So I'm going to select that, go tags, simulation tags, rigid body. And now we've got these nice chunks of debris flying off as our shapes are formed. Okay, that's looking pretty good. The only other thing I need to do right now is to set up a floor for this, because I want our shapes to land on the floor and scatter around. So I'm just going to pause my timeline for a second, and if I go to the Create menu, I can go to Environment and create a floor. So a floor is a plane in Cinema4D. It exists infinitely throughout our scene. Even though we only see it in a limited area, its effect goes infinitely throughout the scene. So that's going to be my floor that everything's colliding with. So if I want them to collide with it, I need to make it into a collider body. So I've made my floor under the Create Environment menu. I'm going to select that floor and go to my tags and add a simulation tag, and I want a collider body this time. I don't want it to fall with gravity or fly off anywhere. I just want it to be a rigid body that just sits there and everything else collides with. It's going to make it a collider body. The other thing I've noticed is that my text, the P on the text is dropping down through my floor. So I'm just going to grab that text object and I'm going to move it upwards so it's just off the ground a little bit so that I don't have the problem with the bottom of the P sticking through the floor. So my floor's a collider. I've got all my clones dynamic. If I hit rewind and play, hopefully all my clones that aren't following the text should slide around the floor. Brilliant. That's all working. Okay, now the only thing I need to do with mine, now that all my clones are working, is I need to add a few more clones into the text, because a bunch of them now, these pyramids and these platonics, they're all falling off, so it's making the clones that stick to the text a little bit, there's less of them. So if I go back to that cloner again and just play around with the step value and reduce it, I can add some more clones in there and just make sure I've got enough to reveal my text. The other thing I'm going to do while I'm here is just give myself some more time on the timeline. So just below your timeline, the default length of time for our scenes is 90 frames. I'm going to make mine, I don't know, 300 frames. So just type that in, hit enter, and extend my timeline so I'm seeing that whole range of frames. And now I've got my animation pretty much doing what I want it to do.